Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this interesting Lunch and Learn on Legislative 101. We're very excited to have Dan with us today. The goals of today's session, attendees are going to learn more about the Minnesota Legislature, and you'll be able to ask questions about the process and become a better self-advocate. Next slide. So a little bit about the Olmstead Implementation Office, or OIO. They're a team of people who work with the Olmstead Subcabinet, and they have two main jobs: to track the state's progress on the Olmstead Plan goals and to report the results of the Olmstead Subcabinet and the public. They help people with disabilities, their families and supporters to give ideas about how to make the Olmstead Plan better, and people can share their ideas at a public meeting or by contacting OIO on their website. They have many links there, so you can go there and sign up or learn more if you'd like. And I'm part of a team, including staff from OIO with disabilities, helping to support this and other community input events. All right, next slide, please. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Kitzberger to you, who is the Minnesota Housing Representative and a Legislative Director. Well, just a reminder, if you could mute yourself if you're not sharing, and that way it gets rid of any feedback there. Thank you. So we're really pleased to have him with us today. He's going to talk about the legislature, and then we will have time for questions afterward. So Dan, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Leah, for facilitating today's meeting, and to Diane and the Office of and OIO for the invitation to be here. Again, my name is Dan Kitzberger. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Legislative Director for Minnesota Housing, and I am a middle-aged white man with brown hair, and I'm in an office with white and gray walls. And I have a poster of the fishes of Minnesota behind me on the wall. So I thought we'd start off with a few slides to kind of orient everybody and ground everyone in the same information. And I know there were some questions submitted ahead of time from folks who are attending today. And then we've got a few other questions too that we could possibly run through if there's time and they weren't covered in the slides. So if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. So what is a legislative session? So going back to the founding of the state of Minnesota in 1858, and actually this was true before the state was founded when it was a territory. There was a legislature that was incorporated and voted on, and individual members were voted on. And they met and still do meet every year to both set a budget and to set laws, create laws for the state of Minnesota. And so in odd numbered years, the legislature convenes, meaning gets together to set a 2-year budget. And in even numbered years, the legislature gets together to do what's called bonding, typically, meaning the state borrows money to build and preserve buildings around the state. And so, interestingly, the legislature doesn't have to meet every year because we set a 2-year budget in odd numbered years, but they do anyway, often because there's still work to be done in those even numbered years. Now, every state has its own legislature. Some call them an assembly. Ours happens to be what's called bicameral, meaning there's 2 chambers. There's a House and a Senate. Some states have a unicameral. I think it's Nebraska has a unicameral. And most states, I think, have a bicameral that meets every year. And so during this time, which is typically in budget years from January until May, there's actually per the Constitution, a set number of days in a 2-year period that the legislature can meet and conduct business. And there's actually a set adjournment date in the Constitution. It's the first Monday after the third Saturday in May is when the legislature has to be done with their work every year. And I think it's 120 legislative days they can actually meet and in an official capacity and do work. And as indicated here on the slide, the duration of legislative sessions can vary greatly among states. I think it's North Dakota actually that only meets every other year. And as I said, we could, but typically our legislature convenes every year, and then sometimes multiple times a year, as they've done. I think it was most recently in 2020, where there were multiple special sessions held during the pandemic to, pass new types of laws and spending to help people during that difficult period of time. So let's go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk about the legislature itself. So as I mentioned, there are two, ours is what's called a bicameral legislature. There's a House and there's a Senate. The House includes 134 members from around the state, and there are 67 senators. So the way to think about this is that the state is broken out into legislative districts, and those districts are actually determined by both the courts and by the census. So we just had a census done in 2020, and some of those lines for districts changed around the state based on people moving here or people moving within the state, growth within the districts. And so those lines get redrawn every 10 years. And in Minnesota, it's done a little bit differently in every state in terms of drawing the legislative districts. I think we're kind of fortunate in that it's the courts that draw them. And so in other states, it's the legislature. And so it can end up being kind of a long and political and drawn out process that, but in Minnesota, we kind of remove and preclude all of that by having a nonpartisan group of judges draw those lines. And so the number of legislators, so the 201 total is set. That number doesn't change per the Constitution. However, the number of people represented will change and continue to change and has grown quite a bit in the last 140-ish years of statehood. So right now, it's anywhere between 40 and 50,000 people who are represented by an individual member of the House of Representatives, and about twice that. So about 100,000 people represented by an individual senator. So there are 67 Senate districts, and there are in each Senate district, there are 2 members of the House of Representatives. So there's an A side of the district and the B side of the district. So in a few slides, when we talk about, how to look up who your legislator is, you'll see them. When you do that, you'll see them listed. And again, an important distinction here, this is based on the population. So the lines drawn for the districts don't always follow counties, because there are 87 counties, right, in the state, but only 67 districts. So in some cases, part of a district will align with a county border. And sometimes it'll stop, at a river or, a major highway or thoroughfare in a town. So, those are things that courts take into consideration when they're drawing those districts every 10 years. And importantly, members of the House are elected every 2 years, and members of the Senate are elected every 4 years. And this is different than say, the United States Congress, where the House is elected every 2 years, the Senate is elected every 6 years. Now, to add further confusion, after a census, so what was done in 2020 is the entire legislature is up after a 2-year period. So we redrew those maps in 2020, and then everybody, including the Senate, had to run again in 2022. So now that we've done that, both the governor and the senator, the Senate will be in office serving a full 4-year term. Whereas only the House of Representatives will be, all of them will be up for election in 2024. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So what is the legislative process? So if we think back to our civics classes that we may have taken in middle school or high school, we think of government as having 3 branches, or 3 legs of a stool. There's the executive branch, which includes the governor and the state agencies, and of which I am employed by, or an employee of. I'm an employee of the state of Minnesota, but I'm employed in the executive branch. And then there's the legislature, which is the House and Senate, and then there's the judicial branch, which is the courts. And so making laws is a collaborative process among 2 of those branches, between the governor and the legislative branch. So the legislature writes, votes on, and passes laws, and the governor can choose to sign them into law so they become law, or veto them, meaning he decides not to sign them into law, and instead they either don't become law, or they can go back to the legislature and they can decide to override the governor's veto of a law, and they need a higher threshold. So in a republic, which the United States is, and in which Minnesota is, a majority of votes in the legislature allows for a bill to become a law. That is, unless we are borrowing money. In that case, there needs to be a 2/3 majority in order to do that. There also needs to be a 2/3 majority in order to override a governor's veto. And I should say that both vetoes are somewhat rare. It can happen more frequently when the governor and either one or both legislative chambers is of the opposite political party. Then it happens a little more frequently. An overriding of a veto is even more uncommon, and that's because it takes many more members of either the House and Senate to be able to do that. I think the last time it happened was in 2008, and that was a transportation-related bill that then governor vetoed, and actually some Republicans joined with members of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, who were in the majority at the time, in order to override that veto. So it's a very rare thing that happens. So as I mentioned before, the legislature can only meet for a set amount of days in a 2-year period. And in order to pass laws, that work has to be conducted during those legislative days. And during the occasions where there are special sessions, which I think the last time we had one was in 2020, it's the legislature, it's the governor that calls a special session. They say, there's some extenuating circumstance. The legislature needs to convene during a period of time when they normally wouldn't, or when they weren't planning to. And then the legislature will reconvene and then decide when they will end a special session. And so we really, for a state as large as Minnesota, I think we have a population of something like 5.7 million now. For as many people who are affected and as much money is involved, we actually have a fairly limited number of days in which to do a lot of work. And so the days end up being long and busy and chaotic, and especially at the end of a legislative session. So when you get into May, that's when they're meeting all night, and negotiations between the House and Senate and the governor. As I mentioned, it really needs to be a collaborative process in order for anything to get done. Those meetings happen at length, at odd hours of the day and night. And so because they have deadlines they have to meet, and only so many days in which to do their work. So, the period of time between January and May can be kind of a frenzy if you work in or around the legislature. So let's go to the next slide. So the primary role of a legislator is to write and vote on bills. And bills are proposed laws. They aren't laws yet because they haven't been voted on. And a very long time ago, it was as simple as it being a piece of paper that was handwritten. Somebody said, somebody somewhere said, we ought to do this, or we ought to make this change to an existing law. And so what happens then is that a bill gets proposed. And the thing I want to point out is that I don't know the exact percentages, but it is pretty rare that a legislator has an idea for a bill on their own. It can happen that a legislator runs for office. And again, I think I would note, backing up a step even further, Minnesota has what's called a citizen legislature. So they are not full-time legislators, even though they may put in full-time hours. They are paid, but they are paid, not commensurate with the amount of work they have to do. And they are not experts a lot of the time in, the role and function of a legislative body, or, experts in public policy or the work of state agencies. They are farmers, they are teachers, they are attorneys, they are stay-at-home parents, they are small business owners. They come from all over the state and have backgrounds very much that don't necessarily prepare a person to become a legislator. Some of them may have served in local office, have been on school boards or city councils, or have been mayors or county boards. A lot of that happens too. But that's why it's so important for people in their districts, for constituents of these legislators, to help them understand their experience and help them understand, what the impacts of certain proposals might be on people's lives. And so more often than not, the idea for bills, whether it's just something that makes a change to law or makes a new law or spends money or both, those come from people in the district, and they come from advocacy organizations. They come from paid lobbyists who represent a specific group of people or a concern. And it's the job, or not the job, but an important responsibility of people to work with their legislators in order to move bills through the process. And so let's go ahead to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, about how to work with a legislator, and then also about how to influence the process. So you can find out who your legislator is by visiting the legislature's website. So let's go ahead and move to that screen. I think we have a screen grab here. This is kind of hard to see, but it's www.lg.minnesota.gov. leg.mn.gov. And this will bring you to the legislature's main page. And if you look either under the House of Representatives or under the Senate, there's a box that says enter address under who represents me. That's where you can find out who your legislators are, both at the state and at the federal levels. And I would also note, if you look in the lower right-hand corner under About the Legislature, there are frequently asked questions, and there's a whole wealth of information there, including most of everything that we're going to talk about today, to help people understand, not just how to get to the Capitol and where to park and, all the logistics of being there, but, how to interact with your legislators and track bills through the process as well. Those are all, I think we have one of the better websites, legislative websites in the country. And they're constantly making improvements to it. The staff who work on it are very responsive. If you see a gap or you see a need somewhere or think something might function better, because this is the main way that people, maybe people who don't live in St. Paul, have transportation barriers, live far away. This is the main way that they can keep up to date and understand what's going on with their state legislature. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So how do you ask questions? How do you interact with your legislator or your legislators? And there are really three ways to do this. One is by letter or email. There are still people who do write handwritten letters or typed letters to their legislators. And I used to work at the legislature, and one of my jobs was to keep an eye on legislators' emails and their mail. And then one of my other jobs was to do research and respond when folks write in if they have a concern, or if they say, "Hey, I support or I oppose this particular thing. What does my legislator think about it?" It was one of my jobs was to help manage the communication. So as I mentioned, they're one person, and they represent, in some cases, over 100,000 people. And, people do expect a lot from their state legislators, and rightfully so. But sometimes it takes a team and, a legislator needs some help in order to manage that communication. I will note that most legislators do monitor their own email. They may not respond to everything on their own, but they do have some sense of what's coming in and landing in their mailbox, especially toward the end of session when they're spending very long days at their desk in either the House or Senate chambers. They have some time, while kind of multitasking, listening to the debate, participating in the debate, presenting bills or amendments or arguments for or against. They have some time then, and in order to correspond. And that's one of the things that, if you're familiar with the process, if you're able to use the legislative website and understand the schedule, you can find opportune times in order to which to communicate with your legislators. Over phone, they all have office numbers. Not all of them actively monitor or pick up the phone. It's often staff that do that. They do take voicemails. Some of them do give out their personal cell phone numbers, so you can interact with them that way, either by voice or by text. And then another way, and which is still, which we didn't get to do a lot of in the last couple of years, but this year, things are kind of back to the way they were pre-pandemic. You can visit them at the Capitol, or you can visit them in their district. A lot of legislators will hold town hall meetings. This happened virtually quite a bit in the last couple of years, over platforms like Zoom. Otherwise, they'll, maybe in some cases do what they think of as holding office hours, where they'll just get a table at a coffee shop or a restaurant in their district, and they'll stay there for a set amount of time, and they'll let people know that they're there. And then people can come and visit with them as they choose. And so, you may find you have better success reaching your legislator in their district, either on evenings or weekends, or during the period of time called interim, which is usually June through December, where they're not at the Capitol on a regular basis. Or you may find you have better success coming to the legislature, coming to the Capitol, either as part of a day on the Hill put on by an organization, or just individually, if you call and you set up a meeting. Legislators are still pretty good at prioritizing their constituents, over lobbyists or particular interest groups that may want to meet with them. It's usually the people from their district that get priority when it comes to scheduling. And as mentioned here on the slide, I think in person is still probably the most effective. We were able to do a lot of work and conduct a lot of work while everybody was at home, having to be remote. But if your legislator knows you or knows the work of an organization you're involved with, you're much likelier to get their attention and to be able to influence the decisions they make. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. So how do you work with your legislator to develop a bill? Because that's kind of why we're all here, right? Is to write and pass laws and hopefully get new funding for the programs we care about. So there's a group of very smart people who are attorneys called the Reviser of Statutes, the Office of the Reviser of Statutes. And it is their job to write bills in a way that conforms to the standards that exist for our state statute. State statute is meant to be, plain language, understandable to the masses. However, some subjects that state government deals with are pretty complex. And so it doesn't always work out that way. And oftentimes we find that people disagree about what the law says or means. And so that's why we have the judicial branch to help kind of mediate and or make decisions about what things actually say and what they mean. So even though these ideas for bills can come from individuals who aren't in the legislature, they do need a legislator to request a bill and work with the reviser in order to get that done. Some legislators are pretty hands-off on this process, so they'll make the initial request to a reviser, and then they'll say, I have this individual or group of people who I'd like you to work with in order to get things drafted. It's interesting that the Speaker of the House recently sent out a memo to all of her members in the House of Representatives saying, that relationship is getting a little bit informal, perhaps, between, outside entities who aren't legislators and the reviser's office, or nonpartisan House staff who can also draft legislative language. So we need to tighten that up a little bit and make sure that specific requests and there's ongoing approval and dialogue with particular legislators who are going to be introducing bills. We need to make sure that process is still following law and standard operating procedure for the legislature. So as is stated, it's only legislators, constitutional officers, that being the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, or the state auditor, or a state agency, Typically, a commissioner or somebody who's an appointed official at an agency can ask for that process to happen. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So how does a bill become a law? So there's a fairly prescriptive process for this and this is kind of a very straightforward example of how it typically happens, albeit with some, more details along the way. So we start out by having a bill drafted through a legislator, and then we collect authors for the bill, co-authors. So you can either introduce a bill with just one author, or you can introduce a bill with multiple authors, or you can introduce a bill with one author and then add authors later. So in the House, you can actually have up to 35 total authors on a bill, and the Senate is up to 5. We like to think that bills that have bipartisan authors are more likely to become law, so meaning authors from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. It doesn't always work out that way, but generally speaking, ideas or bills that have bipartisan support, at least get a little bit more attention, or are more likely to get more attention from the legislature and move through the process. So a bill gets introduced, and it has to be, in order for a bill to eventually become law, an identical version has to pass through both the House and Senate and be introduced in identical versions in both the House and Senate. It can change along the way. There can be differences when it passes, when it's moving through the committee process, or, I just bumped my phone. It can have changes made to it through the processes in both the House and Senate. And we'll talk more about that. Right now, actually, is a good time to talk about it. So a bill, in order for it to become a law, has to have 3 separate readings on 3 separate days. There are exceptions to this, but the legislature has to decide to do that by what's called suspending the rules. So when a bill is introduced, it gets its first reading, and then it's referred to a committee. So this is a really important part to understand about the legislative process, is that while there are a lot of legislators, they are broken out into committees that oversee certain parts of the budget and certain parts of the statute and the work of certain parts of, state government, primarily the executive branch. And so when a bill is introduced, like I said, it gets its first reading and it's referred to one of those committees. So the committee that I interact with the most is the housing committees. So in the House, it's called the Housing and Finance Committee. In the Senate, it's called the Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee. So they both do basically the same things, but the bills that get introduced and referred to those committees are typically the same. It's not always that the Housing Committee has a standalone committee. In the past, we've been put together with the Economic Development Committee, which also oversees the work of the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Department of Labor and a couple of other small agencies. We've sometimes been lumped in with the Agriculture Committee. And we've been fortunate the last couple of years that we have our own committee. There's one other kind of key distinction. In some cases, if the work of a committee is quite big and broad and will take a lot of time, and an example of that would be Health and Human Services. Those committees are broken out, or that topic area is broken out into a policy committee and a finance committee. And in this case in the case of this year, and I think even the previous couple of years, health was broken out from human services. So there was kind of a healthcare oriented committee, and there was a human services oriented committee in both the House and Senate, both policy and finance. The important thing to remember is that oftentimes, if they're separated in that way, their work will all come together in what's called an omnibus bill. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk our way through the legislative process itself. So once a bill is referred to committee, it may or may not get a hearing. Committees do try to hear most, if not all, the bills that come to their committee. Again, it kind of depends what it's about, who introduces it, who's supporting it, and who's opposing it. Again, that's kind of the political part of the public policy making process. Those considerations get made. When it's heard in committees, and this is another important point, is that bills sometimes only have one committee stop to make before they're, before they have the opportunity to go back to either the House or Senate for full passage. Other times they have to make a lot of committee stops because they deal with multiple different subject areas. So I mentioned before that the Housing Committee will oversee the area of statute that governs the Minnesota Housing Agency, or they will oversee one area of the budget that is determined by, or that will be spent by Minnesota Housing. So a lot of our bills are relatively straightforward in that way. There are other bills, thinking about bills in the health and human services area that get very complex, that may have to, make multiple stops. One probably notable example this year of a bill that will have to make multiple committee stops is cannabis legalization. And so if you were to actually take a look at that bill, you would see how many different chapters of state law are impacted, and therefore how many different committee stops it's going to have to make in the next couple of months before it has the chance to be voted on and signed into law. This committee process is where bills get presented, by the bill author and by experts and members of the community to help them understand what's in it and what it does. This is where bills get amended. Some bills don't get amended. Some bills can just pass as they are. And this is where members of the public can come and tell committee members how they feel about these particular bills. They can, either testify in support, they can testify in opposition, they can just provide, general information as, a subject matter expert. But it's really the work of committees where legislators get to know their subject area and they get to know each other in order to hopefully facilitate, better relationships. And as a result of that, make better laws in a less, volatile and partisan environment. And so I mentioned that part about a bill having to have 3 separate readings on 3 separate days. So after a bill is heard in committee, it'll go back to the floor and say, hey, the committee made these changes. Let's give it its second reading. And then it will be added to a list of bills that will get considered either before the full House or Senate whenever they decide to bring them up. It doesn't necessarily mean because a bill passed committee, early in a legislative session that it'll get brought up before the full House or Senate in a timely way after that. It's really the leadership of those different chambers that decides when it will be heard. And so after the bill is heard on the full floor, again, it can be amended still before the full House or Senate. That does happen from time to time. That's when it gets its third reading, when debate ends on the bill, and then they can, it will then be brought up for a final vote. Again, it just needs a simple majority in order to, simple meaning more than half, not necessarily simple in that it's easy to get to a majority, right? This is supposed to be a deliberative process, hence bills getting third readings or 3 different readings and a lot of consideration by a lot of people throughout. Now, I mentioned before that bills, in order to become law, have to be identical, pass an identical form, word for word, letter for letter, out of both the House and Senate. If that doesn't happen, if the House and Senate pass different versions, then they need to appoint a conference committee. So that usually ends up being the chair of the committee that, where the bill was initially referred, along with the bill author. And then usually these are bipartisan committees. And so it ends up being, 4 to 5 members from both the House and Senate deciding how to reconcile, how to work out the differences between the House version and the Senate version. So once that's done, it then goes back to the House and Senate, where it can no longer be amended for passage by the full House or Senate. Once that happens, it's then sent to the governor, and then the governor has a set period of time to either sign or veto a bill into law. So just let's move on to the next slide, because I think there's a graphic here. So this is a very kind of real baseline sample of how a bill can become a law, from idea to bill to committee work, going back to the floor, to getting voted on by each chamber, to maybe having a conference committee, and then going on to the governor and being signed into law. Most of the bills that go to the governor are what's called omnibus bills, meaning they deal with essentially everything that a committee has decided should be included into that. So there will be a state government omnibus bill that has to do with the funding and operations of state agencies. There will be an education omnibus bill. There will be a natural resources omnibus bill, a transportation omnibus bill. There will be a housing omnibus bill. There will be health and human services omnibus bills. So these bills are often hundreds of pages long, or maybe even thousands of pages long, and they're made up of all those different bills that were referred to committees along the way. And they can include both laws or changes to statute for how things work, and funding and money that gets spent on programs. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So how can you participate? Following committees, either arriving in person or following along on the legislative website. Most committees are live streamed, so you can watch them as they're happening. They are better now after a couple of years of doing work over remote platforms of accommodating people who maybe can't get to the Capitol, but want to be able to speak to a bill, and having you testify remotely. There are opportunities to do that. You can contact committee staff for the specific committee that's hearing the bill you're interested in, and get an accommodation. So you can offer support or comments to the bill author, by contacting them directly in one of the ways we talked about, or you can do that in committee. A word of advice is that, authors of a bill kind of like to know where people and organizations stand on a bill they're carrying ahead of a committee. That often makes for a better relationship. And then you can ask to speak at town halls, or, work with an organization to do a listening session with a legislator. If you're interested in, either having them author a bill on your behalf, or, you want their support on a bill, or you want their opposition to a bill. Working with organizations who have a presence at the Capitol and have, relationships established is a good way to reach your legislator, in addition to, being their constituent and, getting to know them individually. So there's a quote here that says, if you don't like the way the world is, you change it. You have an obligation to change it. You just don't have to do it. You just have to do it one step at a time. And that's Marian Wright Edelman. There's a couple of other quotes that I think a lot about. One is must be present to win. I think they often apply that to things like raffles. And then another one is, I think it was Paul Wellstone, former United States Senator from Minnesota, who said, the future belongs to those who show up. And, understanding there's an amount of perhaps privilege and ableism built into that quote, but it's true that, there's the legislature works hard, the staff who are there work hard in order to keep the process open and transparent and accessible. And there are ways. I think there are still many things that need improvement about it. And those who are there get to decide what's happening, because for the longest time, and I would imagine this will continue, the process has been done mostly in person. And so, I'm hopeful that this was a way, and if we can go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, and these are important things to keep in mind. Be courteous and clear, be specific, ask for specific things. Will you author this bill? Will you support this bill? Will you oppose this bill? Use their time wisely. The meetings happen in 15 or 30-minute increments a lot of the time, and they can be back to back. Plan what you're going to say. Be brief, be memorable, be concise. Tell the truth and give accurate information. And then follow up. It's just one more opportunity if you write a thank you note to get your name and a face in front of them. So encourage you to do those things. Next slide. So let's get to the questions part. I hope we covered a few things that you may remember. Again, it takes time to understand this process, especially when you're working in it. I've been, staff, an advocate, and now an agency legislative director. I've been around this for over a decade, and I'm still learning new things about it. And what's interesting about it is the issues change, the people change. There are those who've been around for a long time, who work on lots of different things. But these are all opportunities. I hope we've given some sense of how to be influential in the process as a person, as an individual. So I'll leave it there and we'll get to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. That was so interesting. Some of the questions that people submitted ahead of time include just going back to that very first start of the process that you talked about, the authorship. How can somebody start a request to author, say, a policy that they'd want to implement?
Yeah, so if you have an idea, it can be, fairly high level. It's helpful to have something somewhat specific. There are subject matter experts around the legislature who can help. Once you have a legislator who's interested in working with you, there are subject matter experts who can help you kind of refine and get language into bill form in order for it to be considered by the legislature. So it's a matter of contacting your legislator, either individually as a group, and saying, I've run into this issue, or somebody I care about has run into this issue. Here's how I think we can fix it. And in most cases, a legislator, if it's coming from a constituent, will say, yeah, let's work on that together. I think there's something there, and this may affect more than just you. It may affect a lot of people and make a lot of people's lives better. And so thus begins the process of moving a bill through the legislature.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Next question is about, you talked about the different committees that there are, and what happens if I want to find out which committee oversees, for instance, education laws?
Yeah. So there are even though the committee structure changes some from biennium to biennium, it's usually broken out into a handful of topic areas that are fairly standard. So education, health and human services, natural resources, transportation, housing, judiciary, civil law. Those are kind of the things that stick around. There may be some that crop up from year to year based on issues that present themselves. So if you are interested in bills related to education, the education committees are the best place to start. That's one that's the topic area is big enough that there are education policy committees and there are education finance committees. The policy committee is often where bills will start. And then if they spend money in addition to changing a policy, they'll then move to the finance committee. So, as I mentioned, some bills only need to get heard in front of one committee. Others need to make multiple stops. And so it really just depends upon the scope defined by the bill you're moving.
So if an individual's legislator is not necessarily championing the specific issue that they want, would it be better to go through the committee than the legislator?
Yeah, that's where, you're kind of at the mercy of your individual legislators' political leanings, their experience and background. Not everybody agrees with their legislator on everything. And so that's where, you may want to consider working with an organization that does advocacy or has an advocacy component and can help you get connected with legislators who do care or who are interested in a particular issue that you might be interested in, because those organizations often have existing relationships at the legislature. Some of them even may have some financial influence. That's a whole nother lunch and learn for a whole nother day. But it's a relational process, and so to find somebody that you can connect with that cares about the issue, and you may not end up, and it also helps to, through the work of an advocacy organization, actually get connected with constituents who may be in similar circumstances as you, in order to find the legislator that will be interested in working on that particular issue.
Thank you so much. And I think that goes into two other questions. We only have a couple minutes here, but yeah. So if somebody has a particular interest, like advocating for a disabled child or talking to somebody about a group home closing, how would you recommend they get involved? Would that be through an advocacy organization?
That'd be a good place to start. In addition to having relationships, there are organizations who have folks who work regularly around the legislature and get to know legislators individually and their backgrounds and their experiences. I think that's one thing that's important is and you can find out a little bit. There's some biographical information on the website. You can visit their campaign websites and find out, what their issue sets are and what their backgrounds are. But it's finding a way to connect your experience and your issue to what it is they're interested in. Because, through the committee process, legislators do get to know subject matter a little bit better once they're there. And so that can create opportunities as well.
Dan, thank you so much. This has been hugely informative. And on behalf of everyone, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your interest. For those of you who did submit questions and may not have had them answered today, we will be sure to get those answered and post those. Also, you'll see that the survey link just went into the chat. So please be sure to take the survey. You can grab the link from the chat here, or it will be sent out to you later. There's also a list of resources, which you can get when we send out this PowerPoint, along with the recording of today's session. And then I think there's one more here. Yes, here's some other upcoming events. So we've got a couple of input sessions here on the workforce shortage, February 7th, affordable, safe, accessible housing on the 8th. And one more. Do we have another slide there? Yes, and another lunch and learn all about plan amendments coming up on March the 1st. So just a reminder, everybody who's registered will get the PowerPoints and slides and recording after today's meeting. And then you'll also have that survey that was posted in the chat sent out to you too. You can always visit the OIO website, sign up for their newsletter and information on any of this. But on behalf of the Olmstead Implementation Office and everyone here, thank you again, Dan. Thanks to all the participants for coming today, and I hope you have a safe and good rest of your day. Thanks very much, everyone.